October 1st, 2022. Time keeps passing like a wheel inexorably. This is the Kala Chakra, the wheel of time. Keeps rolling on and on without ever stopping. So this is a theme for me. We had our dear friend Mettika passed away almost a week ago. It was last Sunday, so tomorrow will be a week since she passed away. At 10:05 p.m. last Sunday. Since that time, I found myself thinking of her a lot. And so this is just because of that close relationship. So when someone close to us or a loved one passes away, then we end up thinking of them constantly. Where are they? Where did they go? What happened to them? What is death? What is the nature of death? These thoughts constantly coming up. So as Buddhists, believing in reincarnation, transmigration, where was she reborn? Was she reborn? But then coming back to this, just that sense that there is death, not having to proliferate, not having to speculate about it, but just noticing this is the way it is, and the body passing away is like this. So this is a very important meditation that we do, the meditation on death, and it's a great blessing to be able to be around people who are going through the death process, and to witness that is a great blessing. And the Vasa period is wrapping up. We have 9 days left for this 2022 Vasa period, and we'll be looking forward to Katina. So the Vasa ends on October 10th, and then Katina on October 30th. And looking forward to more visitors, if everything goes as planned. Lumpur Viradamo visiting near the end of the month and being with us for the Katina, as well as Ajahn Sudanto. So when we give talks, in the style of the Thai forest tradition and Lumpur Cha and the other Ajahns, then we may talk about meditation. It'll be up to the individual monk who's giving the talk, up to their tendency or their temperament. But then we'll inevitably not just talk about meditation, but how to integrate the practice into our daily lives. And so the Noble Eightfold Path encompasses our whole life. It's not just meditation. And also everyone's going to connect with different types of meditation techniques. So the key is not necessarily that we teach one technique and it's going to work for everybody, but that we have to know ourselves, and then we'll know what techniques and what tactics, what upaya, what skillful means might work for us in our meditation practice and in our daily living, our practice as living in general. So there's these basic things. We know ourselves, what character tendency we might have. If we tend towards strong passion and longing, we might then think, I need the asubha kammatthana, the mindfulness of the body, or looking into the unattractive nature of the body. Or if we tend towards anger, resentment, we might need to look into metta kammatthana, or development of goodwill for ourselves and others, and so on. Or if we're a scientific mind, a speculative type, thinking a lot, vitakka charita, the thinker. So if we're constantly thinking and problem solving, we might need to focus more on anapanasati. So the first step is really knowing oneself. And of course, in the time of the Buddha had this power to be able to know exactly what was going to be the right meditation theme, meditation topic for any given person. but now we're so far after the time of the Buddha, and we do have great teachers with us still who might be able to have insight into our own temperaments, but for the most part we have to know ourselves, know what's going to be right for ourselves, because we're always teaching ourselves anyway. We can only rely on external teachers so much, so actually we're always teaching ourselves. There'll be an inner commentary. We might agree or disagree with certain things, so ultimately we're teaching ourselves, so we have to know ourselves clearly, and then we can teach ourselves the right techniques, the right upaya. Upaya means skillful means, so we'll have to teach ourselves the right things to do so that we can make progress in our practice and reach greater states of happiness, well-being, contentment, peace. If we're in the monastery, then the daily living, everything we do in the daily schedule is geared towards this. So somebody like Mettika, I think of, because I met her when I was in Anagarika back in 2001, so right when I had become an Anagarika, that was in her time of her life where she was coming to Abhayagiri often, and she would come on the lunar observance days and sit up with the community, sit up meditating through most of the night with us. So I have many fond memories of sitting up meditation with Mettika. I have memories of working in the kitchen with Mettika, and although as people who know her well would know, she was quite prickly, but I connected with her right at the beginning and always got along with her. But maybe that's because I was a little bit prickly as well, so two prickly people getting along together. And then over the years, there was 3 Jewels. Once a month, we would go and teach in Fort Bragg at 3 Jewels Dhamma Hall, where Mettika lived. And I always looked forward to going there, and somehow it was always just a very pleasant, wonderful routine to be in, to go and teach there and spend the night. And she would offer breakfast the next morning. And so, taken as individual instances, those types of things might seem small, but then they build up over time as showing her commitment to generosity and to Dhamma, and a delighting in listening to Dhamma teachings, question and answer. It was never a very big group that showed up there, but there could be 12 to as many as 20 people sometimes showing up at 3 Jewels Dhamma Hall. So she would cook breakfast for us in the morning time, and we would have further Dhamma discussion over breakfast. And because Mettika was a student of Ruth Denison, she had a lot of great stories about Ruth, which is always fun to listen to as well. And any great teachers, you hear stories about Luang Por Chah or Ruth Denison, you see these threads, these similar ways of training their students by frustrating them and causing them to come up against themselves. Causing people to be able to see dukkha more clearly. Dukkha and the cause of dukkha. That's what it comes down to. So when we practice, there's a certain energy or a mood that we're cultivating through our practice. And there's a word in Thai that refers to this. This is aram kamatan, or in Pali, I guess you'd say aramana kamatana, or it's the mental states, the aramanas, connected with our practice. So when we practice mindfulness, in particular mindfulness of breathing or the satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, then we develop this mood of peace or this mood of practice. It's something that's good to get in touch with, and it's something that we end up talking about a lot Because as we live our life of practice, it's not about getting some extraordinary state, but it's more about, are we becoming less selfish? Are we becoming not less selfish? We don't want to become less, no, we do want to become less selfish. We don't want to become more selfish. Are we becoming less greedy? Are we becoming less irritable? So in our daily life, how is the practice affecting us? So it's not necessarily about getting some amazing state or having one amazing meditation. Not that that's a bad thing. But if it's coupled with wrong view, it can be dangerous because it can cause us to become more irritable. It can cause us to become more obsessed with ourselves. And we're looking to lessen those things in general. So the meditation coupled with right view is important. Today was doing a online teaching for this meditation group in Oakland, and they read out part of the Satipatthana Sutta at the beginning before we did our meditation. And I was reminded of that phrase, the Vinaya Loke Abhija Domanasang. So getting out from or relinquishing longing and distress with regards to the world. That points to that aramana kammatthana. So coming inwards, bringing it in. There's no shortage of things to be frustrated about outside of ourselves, in the world, and so on. No shortage of things to be irritated about. It always has been that way, is currently that way, always will be that way. It's just the nature of the world. So we relinquish that, at least temporarily, and come into ourselves. Because we're empowered to change ourselves. We can't change the world, or if we can change the world, it's the change we can make is pretty negligible. It's pretty small, but we can change ourselves, and that can be a big change. So when we have that aramana kammatthana that empowers us to practice for ourselves, change ourselves, we can train ourselves, we can stop suffering, or at least suffer less. We can do that. But it has to come from a coming inwards rather than thinking that the suffering is coming from outside. It's a key point of the practice. So the cause of suffering, the second noble truth, is the tanha. Kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha is the cause of suffering. That's kama tanha, or craving with relation to sensuality. That's bhava tanha, craving, say, for becoming or to become something, or craving for existence, or vibhava tanha, which is craving for annihilation, wanting to not exist, wanting to not be. So we address those things in the heart, those energies inside of us. The Buddha teaches that those are the cause of suffering. Now, it's very important to know that the Buddha is not saying these things are bad. It's not a judgment. He's just saying these are a cause of suffering. So if you want to stop suffering, look into these things. If you don't want to stop suffering, then you don't have to look into those things. You can keep that sense of a lack of satisfaction in the heart, or a lack of fulfillment. But if we look into these things and we learn how to work with those energies, yes, our suffering can become less, and our sense of deep inner contentment can become more. So the practice of meditation and of daily practice ends up being building up by stages of a deep inner contentment. It comes from the keeping of the precepts as a foundation. So we say sila, samadhi, panya. We come to the monastery, we keep the precepts. That gives us some ground to stand on. It's very logical, the keeping of the precepts. It's a very logical, rational thing to do. If you think about even just the 5 precepts, it actually cuts out a whole bunch of suffering. It cuts out a whole mass of suffering. Just the bare keeping of those precepts and not even talking about anything else. And the reason it's very logical is if you just spell it out, you look at these 5 precepts, there's the not killing or not taking of life. So that cuts out any suffering. We no longer have the experience that results from the taking of life, not taking what is not given, or say stealing. So we cut that out from our lives. We no longer can experience anything that stealing causes a certain experience. We no longer have that experience. The third of the 5 precepts is sexual misconduct. So if we're keeping the 8 precepts, that's changed to celibacy, but for the 5 precepts, it's just sexual misconduct, which means faithfulness or integrity in our relationships. And that cuts out a whole mass of suffering if we keep that precept. And the 4th precept, refraining from false speech or lying. Actually, the wrong speech can be seen as fourfold, but the main one is lying, so we translate that as lying. Musawada veramani is to refrain from lying. Just thinking of how much suffering lying can cause and how we have to cover our tracks and tell one person one story and another person another story, and how much mental turmoil that causes, and that's all cut out just by not lying, just by keeping that precept. And the 5th precept, so refraining from taking intoxicants, mind-altering drugs or intoxicants, that cuts out all sorts of dukkha or problems. Actually, Sura Meriya, the precept given by the Buddha specifically refers to alcohol. So if you translate it directly, it's refraining from fermented liquor and alcohol. So that refraining from that cuts out a whole mass of dukkha. So just those 5 precepts, and we don't even have to talk about anything else. It just gives us some ground to stand on. And then we might still suffer, we might still feel low and sad sometimes. We might still feel a bit depressed sometimes, but our suffering won't drop below a certain threshold if we are keeping those 5 precepts as a minimum. So that gives us some ground to stand on, and so that's sila. And then after that we talk about samadhi, the firm establishing of the mind. Once we have sila, we can focus on our meditation practice to great effect and cultivate it and make much of it. The mind will be a bit more clear, a bit less regretful, able to look into the true nature of things, or at the very least able to focus on the breath. So that's the samadhi, and then the panya, the discernment. So once we're able to see things clearly and the mind settles a bit, then discernment, we can start to see a bit more clearly the cause and effect nature, cause and effect relationship of our actions of body, speech, and mind. So the training is just the training of body, speech, and mind to be less unwholesome and more wholesome. When the Buddha defines something as unwholesome, it means it's a cause of suffering. It leads to suffering. When the Buddha defines something as wholesome, it means it leads to happiness and well-being, and peace, less suffering. So again, none of these things are like a character judgment. The Buddha's not judging us. The Buddha's rooting for us. The Buddha is a very kind teacher who wants us to develop ourselves. He's very compassionate. There's no punishments that come from the Buddha. The punishments end up coming from ourselves. We end up punishing ourselves with suffering when we act wrongly according to the natural way of things. the word Vinaya, loke. Vinaya means to get out. So loka is the world. So Vinaya loke, like getting out of the world, transcending the world. Vinaya also refers to the discipline. So we say Dhamma Vinaya is the Buddha's own name for the religion of Buddhism. He called it Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma is the truth of the way things are, or it could be thought of as the entire corpus of the teachings, or it could be thought of as the training itself, the practice. Vinaya is the discipline, or we could think of it as Vinaya is the training of body and speech. Dhamma is the training of the mind. You could also think of it that way. So Dhamma Vinaya together is training of body, speech, and mind. And if we think of Vinaya meaning to get out from suffering, to get out from sorrow, to get out from distress. So the Dhamma leading out. The Dhamma leads out from suffering. It's another way to think about it. Sila Samadhi Panya, coming back to discernment. So I end up mentioning this a lot, but I think it's a very good image, and it always is worth mentioning again, is an illustration for discernment. We can think of the natural wisdom of the body, how we recoil from pain, and it's very natural. We don't have to consult somebody about getting away from pain. If we experience something painful, we automatically try to get away from it. So it's like if we put our hand in a fire, the hand automatically recoils from the fire. When our hand is in a fire, we don't need to consult an instruction manual about how to get your hand out of a fire. It just happens automatically. It's the natural wisdom of the body. So when we have discernment, we can see the mind more clearly. The mind won't be able to hold on. It won't be able to not let go. It'll have to stop letting go once it sees clearly the cause of suffering. So we can think of the mind in this, extending the analogy to the mind. Think of the mind as in the fire of suffering. And when there's discernment and clear seeing, the mind can't stay in that fire. It will recoil from it and seek that coolness. It'll get out. It won't be able to stay in the fire. It won't need to consult the teachings or the suttas. It won't need to do any special study. It can't stay in there any longer. It has to get out. It has to Vinaya. It has to get out. So when we talk about discernment, that's tapping into the natural wisdom of the mind, of the heart. And really for everybody in the world, everybody wants to get out of suffering, but most of us aren't going about it in the right way, and so we end up inadvertently planting more causes for suffering, thinking that it's going to lead us out of suffering. So the Buddha comes along and says, well, he's discovered this path, and this is the way out of suffering. Sati, mindfulness, clear awareness, this Sila Samadhi Panya, the keeping of precepts, the practice of mental cultivation, bhavana, meditation, discernment, wisdom, panya, that this is the path out of suffering, according to the Buddha, so we can try it out. There's these different qualities of the Buddha also that we talk about. It was in the first of the Parita chants this evening. We did the Itipiso Bhagawa. And one of the qualities of the Buddha is Lokavidu, the knower of the worlds. So there's this sense of having to know the world, to be able to transcend it. And it's kind of a curious word, Lokavidu, knower of the world. And I've kind of wondered about how that could be an applicable quality to myself, and how it could be practical and applicable and useful. Because it's one of those things, like we talk about sometimes, pachatang, to be seen for oneself, or ehipasiko, come and see. But the lokavidu, it's something like I've wondered how can it be applicable to myself. And so now that I'm in this, I found myself for the last 4 years plus, in a position of being in a position of responsibility in this monastery, and having to meet with a lot of people and talk with a lot of different people, and inside and outside of the monastery, meeting with people abroad and staying in touch with people, and staying in touch with other senior monks, staying in touch with many, many lay people, having more friends and acquaintances and relationships than I ever would have dreamed of when I first came to the monastery, when I was actually trying to get away from people. And it's been wonderful, actually, but it's also, this word loka vidu comes up because, I've found actually meeting with a lot of people and having a lot of relationships quite helpful for my own practice, because if I say, as a monk who is, say, trying to develop a sense of sacrifice and effacement and letting go and developing that contemplation of not self, then anybody who I meet, then there's that cultivation of empathy, and that's loka vidu, that's entering into another person's world. So if I walk across the cloister area and 3 different people come to talk to me, I'll be entering into 3 different worlds, 3 different universes temporarily, and try to be present for that world and know that world of that person. And there might be some issue or something, or somebody just needs to pass on some information, but temporarily contacting all these different worlds. And then as that expands through the day, meeting with a lot of different people, then it's trying to have empathy and know all these different worlds and learn from them. And it's like, wow, there's all these different worlds that I'm surrounded by. And in doing that, then my own world losing its sense of importance, and that's quite a relief, actually. What a relief! We might hear that and think, oh, that's quite sad. Why can't he go and do things he likes to do? But in actually relinquishing that and making other people's worlds my own world, that's quite wonderful, actually. That's quite a relief. So continuing that on to its conclusion, can I get to that point of total effacement where I don't have my own world, and where it's just sort of merges with everybody else's world? I think, oh, that's really sad. Like, why can't he go do what he wants to do and have the fun that he wants to have? But it's actually not the way to the end of suffering. So loka vidu is one of these Buddha qualities that we try to cultivate. And it's not just that I am cultivating that, then all of us can actually cultivate that, and it can be, we can also cultivate that wonderful quality to a greater or lesser extent. Coming back to Mettika, so last Sunday we made it there just in time for, Dennis was there, Dennis and Heidi were there. We made it there just in time we just missed her last breath, but we made it in 1 minute afterwards or so, and was quite an amazing experience to be with her during that time, as the elements were cooling down, as the body was cooling down, as the fire element was leaving, as the subtle breath energy perhaps was still there for a while, and then that was slowing down. This sense of stilling or settling was really apparent, and she was very peaceful as someone who practiced for her whole life. It's quite inspiring to see that somebody, even though she experienced quite a bit of pain when she was still conscious, as she was dying, she still took it very courageously and quite remarkable, actually. And she didn't seek distraction. She wasn't asking for books. She didn't want to watch TV. She was literally just laying there in her bed, unable to get up for probably a month or something since she had last gotten up to the time she passed away, and seemed fairly content just to lie there, not restless, not agitated. Quite remarkable. So this is the result of practice. When we see things like this, then we can think, oh, that's the result, that's the final end of a lifetime of practice. So you get that sense it really does work, and then you get that stronger faith or that confidence in the practice. So as we were with her last Sunday, and then we were there for about an hour and contacted Luang Por, and then Luang Por came down. So we'd been sitting with her for about an hour by the time Luang Por showed up, and then we did the funeral chanting and left and hung out in a rec room off to the side for a while. And while apparently these undertakers are on call 24 hours, or whoever cleans the body, whether it was the doctors or somebody else, but they went in and cleaned the body. It took about 20 minutes, put some regular clothes on her so she wasn't in a hospital gown anymore, and laid her back on the bed. We went back in, did some more chanting, sat with her for a bit longer, and then came back to the monastery. It was about 1:30 a.m. by the time we got back. We were all very tired because it just happened that day was also the Buddhist bicycle pilgrimage. But it didn't matter, because this kind of thing, you only get that opportunity very, very rarely. And so with Mettika, her passing away, it's like a one-time opportunity. You just have to go do it, go be with her. And then the next day in the afternoon, we went and did more chanting at the funeral home. They had her body in a room, in the center of a room, and we stood around and did some more chanting and meditation. And being able to do this kind of thing really brings the practice further into reality. It's no longer conceptual or just intellectual. It's the real life practice, really imagining, that's all of us at some point will be in that same state. And it's a couple days from now, on Monday, there will be the cremation, and we'll do a third round of chanting at that time. So these are a few thoughts I wanted to share this evening, and I'll leave it there.